Welcome to the Field in Focus technical presentation series. For those of you who've been along for the ride for a little while, you might remember that we did some of these series in maybe 2022, 2023, where we heard from some technical specialists about things like surface water, groundwater, ecology, etc. And now we have one that is specifically focused on the Environment Report for East and the activity and focus of our work there. So before I get too far into things, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we are working on here in the eastern sites of the VMFRP. We recognise the diversity of their culture and their deep connection that they have with land and water, and we value our relationships with our traditional owner partners. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and recognise the primacy of traditional owner obligations, rights and responsibilities to use and care for the traditional lands and values. So my name is Kate. I am a member of the VMFRP team and have been since 2021. Which makes me a baby in VMFRP terms. So I have some colleagues who've been on this journey a lot longer than I have. But for the course of today, you'll meet James David, who is our Environmental Approvals Manager, and you'll meet Tim Shanahan from North Central CMA. And between us, we'll take you on a bit of a project overview for anyone that's either needing a refresher or a bit late to the party on VMFRP. We'll go through the environmental assessment process, what the process is and where we're at in that process. And then we'll hear from Tim about our preparations for the Environment East report. I'll run you through at the end of that what the next sort of more immediate steps are for the project. And then we'll have a look at the Q&A and see if there's any questions we can answer for people. So VMFRP, the Victorian Murray Floodplain Restoration Project, is a mouthful. But essentially, it's a project that we're working on because the way that the Murray River has evolved periodically to receive water is very different to the way that the river used to operate historically. So the Murray River would spill onto floodplains as often as 8 out of every 10 years, creating rich, lush landscapes teeming with life. And the rich diversity of the floodplains were a heartland for traditional owners, sustaining large communities for tens of thousands of years. And today, traditional owners are carrying on that legacy. But as our towns and cities, agriculture and industry have grown, over time we've changed the way that the river flows to suit our purposes by using weirs and dams. And this has created many benefits for regional communities and economies, but water no longer flows naturally as it once did. And the Murray River can't deliver water to these floodplains often enough to keep them healthy. So the condition of the forests and woodlands of the Murray River floodplains have been declining rapidly over the past decades, and many of the river red gum and black box communities are stressed, particularly those that are further away from the river channel and permanent anna branches, creeks and wetlands. So under normal conditions, the Murray River would spill into the floodplains, but given the increasing disconnected challenges that we're starting to see, the Murray, with population growth, the capacity to deliver water to the floodplains and hold it there for as long as it needs is really becoming the challenge that we're here to solve. In terms of the scope of VMFRP, we needed to be strategic with how we're delivering water to the environment across several identified priority floodplains. And they range in the east from Gunbower and Guttram, Benwell, right through the central sites and as far west towards the South Australian border as Lindsay Island and Walpolar Islands. So the next slide that I want to show you is one that, even if you can't quite read the figures on the screen, and give me a shout if you need to see this a little closer or discuss it in the Q&A. But essentially the figure you're looking at has the middle of the picture is the waterway. It's the non-woody riparian zone that gets water every year. And then as you incrementally step out from that central water body, you get into territory that is like reedy water couch and grasslands. They need water every 1 to 3 years. If you step out again in sort of forest or shrubland, we're talking 1 to 3 or 1 to 5 years. And then as you step out even further into black box or river red gum, sometimes they need water every 4 to 7 or even 7 to 20 years. The frequency is different dependent on the species. Specifically, the topic of our discussion today, or the field in focus, is the Gunbower and Guttram-Benwell sites. And these sites are part of that wider Gunbower, Kundruk, Paracuda icon site. So they're Ramsar and Directory of Important Wetlands of Australia listed. They're home to rare and threatened flora and fauna species and unique wetlands. And they're one of those few remaining forest floodplain systems in Victoria. So those sites were chosen because of that high ecological significance and the habitat and cultural importance that they have. Specifically, why Gunbower? So Gunbower National Park is designed to enable water to be, or the National Park project is designed to enable water to be delivered efficiently and effectively to give the plants and animals of Gunbower National Park the water that they need to flourish. And if we look at sites like Cameron Creek, to make sure that Cameron's Creek can continue to provide habitat for small-bodied fish, the water needs to be delivered to those creeks, to that creek several times a year. If we look at Black Charlie Lagoon, we're talking about once a year to top it up, and then it can slowly draw down for the rest of the year. Bagot Swamp is a spot where we probably need to deliver water 3 years in every 10, in addition to natural flooding, just to support river red gum and the recovery of understory. And then there's Pig Swamp and the surrounding river red gum forest, which combined with natural flooding should be able to provide part of that national park with a drink every 2 or 3 years. But with those works and measures, the project should be a major step towards restoring the health of that floodplain for future generations to experience and enjoy. Over in the Guttram and Benwell forests, the project there is designed to help water, again, be delivered efficiently and effectively. Probably about 4 years in every 10 at Guttram Benwell, and a further 3 years in 10 in the semi-permanent woodland, so that the pump station will operate about 7 years out of every 10. And the water that we deliver there should help restore the extent and distribution of wetland vegetation and to build resilience into both of those forests. So I just wanted to show you what a difference it can make, the before and after of delivering water into these ecosystems. So before, you can see over at Gunbower, the before picture that you're seeing on the left, as you're looking at the screen, is really quite dry. And then after it's received some water, you can see it flourishing. And again, if you look at that landscape below, in its opposite context, the before and after tells a story. And essentially that's what we're trying to do, just add a little bit of control as to where we deliver the water, for how long we deliver the water, and see if we can't mimic those more natural pulses that the landscape need. How will we deliver the water? We're looking at some infrastructure solutions, some works and measures that are as sympathetic as possible to the landscape. So we're effectively trying to find ways, workable footprints, hopefully in already disturbed locations. We work with landowners, land managers, traditional owners, and locals with insights to share, to try and find the least impactful solution and balance that desire to be able to deliver water with the least impact possible. And then the last of the slides that I'll take you through in my scene setting is a look at the scale of the impact versus the inundation area versus construction area, just so that you get a sense of just how much water and how much benefit we can provide with as light a footprint as we can manage. So in that slide, you'll see the longer green bar is telling a story of just the volume of area that we'll be able to water or control the watering of. And then the orange sliver that's there is a comparative representation of the construction footprint that the project has managed to find. So the dials along the bottom of that slide give you kind of a pie slice that tell you whole benefit area versus construction impact or construction footprint. And all of that's is assessed under the environment report and specialist studies. Which brings me nicely to an introduction to James David. So I might hand over to you, James, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm James David. I'm the approvals manager for VMFRP. So I've been involved in these environmental assessment projects or processes since about April of 2021. But these processes predate that. Back in 2019, 2020, thanks, Kate. Skip a slide. 9 projects were individually referred under the Commonwealth Environmental Protection Biodiversity Conservation Act and as well under the Victorian Environment Effects Act. Decisions came down on those referrals that 4 projects required an environment effects statement and 5 projects required an environment report. And they were packaged up, as you can see on the screen there now. 2 environment effect statements covering the 4 projects, West and 2 Central, and then 2 environment reports covering Niveniffer and Burra, and 1 covering Guttram, Benwell and Gunbower. The 2 Central packages have completed their assessment process. That finished in 2023, I think it was. Following which Burra Creek was withdrawn from the VMFRP suite of projects due to recommendations from the Minister for Planning. The remaining 4 central projects are gearing up for construction, and work to finalise the assessments for East and West resumed late last year. So we're getting close to wrapping those up now. The process itself, while we have environment effects statements and environment reports across the suite, they are a very similar process. Thanks, Kate. Despite different name, as I say, very similar process, but they certainly have the same purpose. Through a series of objectives, we're seeking to better understand the environment, to avoid and minimise adverse impacts, and to maximise the benefits. As I say, we're in the final stages now for those 2 sites, the assessments of those 2 sites. We'll come back to some timelines for that later on. But once we finish the environment report, it opens the next steps for the process. The assessments that the environment report covers, there's 13 of them specifically for the environment report, covering those fields you see on the screen there: water, ecology, heritage, land-related matters, bushfire, traffic noise, social and business. So it's very comprehensive, and each assessment informs the others. There's a lot of interaction between the 2. While each specialist has their own specific methodologies, there's a number of common threads and a real basis for what each of them needs to look at. They all start with a desktop assessment, looking at existing available data, literature, previous assessments and reviews. Site visits, field investigations, again, each of those 13 studies have all spent days or weeks in the field, initially back in 2021-22. But again, since the floods in late 24, early 25. And that's been really beneficial because that's meant that our existing conditions discussion is not just a point in time from those 21-22 surveys, but reflect a range of natural variability. Given these are dynamic landscapes, that's a really important thing to pin these assessments on and build them off. Some of the assessments have required modelling to varying degrees. They've all required consultation with all sorts of key stakeholders, including community in some regards or some instances. And there's a number of them that require a degree of baseline monitoring, so monitoring over time. The process, as I say, we'll revisit this a bit later on to talk about timeframes for this. But once we've finished the environment report, that gets placed on public exhibition for 30 business days. During that period of time, we'll have a number of information sessions where people will be able to come along and talk to the members of the team, some of the specialists who are involved in the field work and the assessments and drawing the conclusions. All of that documentation will be available online. There'll be a few hard copy locations in the local area where people can drop into, review the documentations, and everyone's invited to make a submission on the project, on any aspect of the project. And we've got a bit more on that later and more information to come in the coming weeks and months around that. But after the exhibition period, a formal public inquiry will be held. Not quite sure on the format of that yet, but similar to what we saw for the central packages, that'll be overseen by an independent panel of experts appointed by the Minister for Planning, whose job it is to review the documentation and the written submissions, ask questions and interrogate the specialists that wrote the assessments, and listen to any of the submitters who choose to present their submission verbally at the inquiry. Absolutely not mandatory to do that, and anyone who doesn't, that doesn't mean their submission's weighted less. All submissions are equal. The committee then informs the Minister for Planning. They provide a report to the Minister for Planning, who makes an assessment on the project, and that's the last step of the assessment process. That Minister's assessment will contain recommendations as to whether the project should proceed as proposed or not proceed. Or what's fairly common is that a project should proceed, but with recommended amendments to project scope or to the management controls that we're applying around the construction and operation. As I say, that's pretty common, and that's what occurred for our central packages. When it's finalised, that Minister's assessment's made public, and that must inform the subsequent approval decisions. So we'll have a bit more work to do to finalise our planning scheme amendment and our relevant documentation for EPBC. The decision makers need to take into account those recommendations from the Minister for Planning. Cultural Heritage Management Plan is obviously another very important primary approval for the projects as well, and that process is running in parallel with all of this. Then there's a number of construction phase permits. Got a few of those listed there, certainly not all of them. A lot of legislation and regulation around projects in these kind of environments. Before I hand back the mic, I do just want to touch on the planning scheme amendments in a little bit more detail. As I say, this is very important approval for the project, and one that perhaps touches more people in the local communities than any other. Basically, for starters, planning scheme, all councils in Victoria have planning schemes. Enshrined under the Planning and Environment Act, it's the planning schemes that set out the objectives, the policies, the rules for the use and development of land. Most people's interaction with that is going to be through the zones and overlays, which trigger planning permit requirements. No different for a renovation at home as it is for a project. It's just different triggers. The planning scheme amendment is, as it says on the tin, it's an amendment to the planning scheme. So what we're looking to do, thanks Kate, is there's two fundamental elements of the planning scheme amendment that we'll be proposing. The first one is an incorporated document, which we propose to include in both the Campaspe and the Gannawarra planning schemes. And essentially, that's a set of conditions that apply in lieu of planning permits. So that's conditions that would need to be met to the satisfaction of, for example, the Minister for Planning, the Secretary of DECA department. And its purpose really is to streamline and align the approval requirements across the VMFRP suite of projects, so they're all being held to the same standard. And across the 4 local government areas that the project touches, each of those have slightly different permit requirements. But importantly, that incorporated document is tailored still to reflect the local context of each site. And we've seen that in our 2 central incorporated documents, where we've got a slight difference between the one that applies for Hatter and Belsar and the one that applies for Niabenifera. The incorporated document will only have effect within an area defined by a specific controls overlay. So the overlay would be inserted into the scheme, and that would apply to public land and private land where it's necessary to do so. Landowner consultation has been underway around these projects for a number of years. So those who would be affected by the specific controls overlay and the projects more broadly are certainly already aware of that, and further consultation around these planning scheme amendments, the controls, the overlay coming up, and the team will be in touch around that. It is important to note that all of that incorporated document, the SCO, specific controls overlay, is project specific. So nothing in that changes the existing zone and overlay controls that govern the use and development rights. So what you can do on your land now, if the SCO applies to your land, you will be able to do post-project. There's no change to anything now. And there's more detail on all of that, probably a little more coherently than I've delivered now, in fact sheets on the website. And so by all means, please jump on that, questions now or at any point in time through the various channels that the project has. So I think that's me, Kate.
Thank you. Appreciate you taking us through that. We will hand over to Tim Shanahan from North Central CMA, who will be able to take us through the environment report progress with a local lens. Tim.
Great. Thanks, Kate, and good evening, everyone. I think I know most people. Tim Shanahan from the North Central CMA. We've been working on these projects for over a decade now, closely with the community and our key stakeholders. We were able to do a lot of that work up to 2022 and the floods, and then we were paused in 2023. And since then, we've been able to really focus in on the investigations and the work to understand the assessments of our floodplains and any changes since then, to complete a lot of those technical assessments and really pull them together for the environment report. And then these 3 key targets as well. Firstly, around restoring and helping the floodplain and wetlands to build their resilience and cope with climate change and those lower river flows. We do know that the forests are declining. Traditional owners, community groups, landholders living beside these forests have been telling us that. We do know that the floodplains and water-dependent communities, particularly those threatened species, won't be able to survive without improved water supply. We want to be able to reconnect these floodplains and remove those blockages so they're connected back to the river and enable that effective and targeted water delivery, especially during those dry times when the vegetation really needs a drink of water, and those flood-dependent, water-dependent communities we see are in need of those. Building infrastructure like the pump stations and containment banks at disturbed sites, utilising the existing infrastructure like perimeter levees around these forests as well, because we all know that those healthy and functioning floodplain forests support the cultural heritage and community values that we have, such as tourism, fishing, wood collection, apiary. So, you know, those are really what we're looking to achieve. And in doing that, thanks, Kate. At Guttram and in Benwell, so Guttram, intrinsic part of the landscape. It's really part of the social fabric we have there just below Kundrook and Barham. 2 floodplains that intend to engage early in a high flow event along the Murray. They've got really good wetland and swamp complexes, especially reed bed in Guttrim, and then also those important complexes in Benwell as well. We know that they're dominated by red gums. They've got a lot of flood-dependent understory there that we really need to be able to provide greater flexibility and restoring that ecological condition by augmenting that natural flooding, increasing those wetting and drying cycles. They'll have the smaller and the larger watering events and top-up events to those wetlands as well. They've got perimeter levees around them. What we're looking to do is re-establish those more natural wetting and regimes with 2 pump stations at Guttrim, 1 pump station at Benwell, 125 megalitres per day each, so they're relatively small. We can use pump stations with greater flexibility if we've got low supply in the Murray. We can utilise the pump stations, and we'll also use the regulators on the flood runners to get water in and out of the floodplain, taking advantage of those high flow events. We can keep water out of the floodplain if it's a flood event, but we can also keep the water on the floodplain for the duration that the vegetation is looking for and the extent to be able to restore its health. As I mentioned, those perimeter levees around these forests, they've been able to contain 1 in 100-year flood events. They're fit for purpose. We're only going to touch the toe in a few places of those levees to be able to keep water in the forest. So we'll be able to utilise those in the landscape. We move on to Gunbower. Gunbower, as we know, is a Ramsar site. It's a director of important wetlands. We know that there's rare and threatened species at Gunbower. It's prime habitat. It is a bit of a biodiversity hotspot and one of those few remaining really important floodplains along Victoria. For Gunbower project, it's really in 2 parts. The first part is Cameron's Creek. We've got 8 diverters there. The Parks Victoria would like them to no longer divert out of Cameron's Creek. We've got small-bodied fish of threatened species that we can really take advantage of supplies to there, and then improving the supply to Bagot Swamp as well. It's a little bit too wet at the moment. We can get it back to a wetting and drying cycle at Cameron's Creek, and those irrigators will then join the national channel, become Gomeroi Water Irrigator Network people, and be able to get their supply there. Then for Middle Gunbower, a pump station at Brereton Road, 125 megalitres per day again, cascading water down along the flood runners. So we know that Gunbower has a very strong river red gum flood dependent understory along those flood runners. Up on the terraces, you've got the black box and grey box. We're not targeting those areas as such. It's more the flood runners where we're getting that water. We can get water in through Deep Creek, and then we can also get the water off the Murray as well on those high flow events like we can at Guttrim and Benwell to take advantage of those flows as well. We can hold water with the regulators at the bottom. We can get that water into Red Rice Swamp area. It's what we call the lungs of Middle Gunbower, so we can improve the health there and hold the water on the floodplain, but also let it go. So we've got that nutrient-rich water going back into the Murray for the fish. And it's really about getting that watering into the footprint. There's the flood-dependent understory is looking for at the frequency aligned with what that vegetation is looking for to improve its health and increase its resilience. Okay. We've worked together, as I said, with our communities, our stakeholders and our adjacent landholders for over a decade. In 2019, we set the project up, doing those specialist assessments, those infrastructure designs and the CHMPs. We've had the stakeholder advisory groups in place since 2021, and we're restarting those again. And their local knowledge, input into the designs and those assessments has been absolutely vital. And we've engaged with over 34 landholders around the perimeter of our forests to be able to get property development plans developed with them so that any works we can undertake with their input and with their consent as well. Thanks, Kate. And we've walked alongside the traditional owners. Yorta Yorta for Gunbower, Barappa and Wamba for Guttrim and Benwell. What are their values and aspirations, and understanding those for what they're looking to achieve into the longer term and for generations to come? There are cultural heritage hotspots in each of these floodplains. We've increased the collaboration with those peoples, those traditional custodians, to understand what they're looking for. And we've undertaken 2 CHMPs cultural heritage management plans so that we can understand what values are in the landscape of where the infrastructure is proposed to be built. Thanks, Kate. So the work that we've focused on currently is undertaking those ecology assessments for terrestrial and aquatic ecology, really cognizant of the 2022 floods and any changes that have occurred across the floodplain. We've updated our hydraulic modelling to have input into our surface and groundwater reports. And as I mentioned before, our heritage, both Aboriginal and historical heritage, which are really important parts of our landscape, have been updated with that local input as well as better understanding what are the project benefits in the landscape so that they're contemporary. Thanks, Kate. And we've done our hydraulic modelling update as well, which is based on our digital elevation models and our satellite LiDAR, which is a photo there. And it's really about predicting where the extent of that managed inundation event is to occur. And then we can utilise that to understand which threatened species, flora and fauna, our EVCs, are in the inundation area, but it also gives us an understanding of what's going to be inundated, which tracks, which wood coops, so that we can spread those wood copes across the various forests across northern Victoria. What are the visitation areas going to be? But we also know that real world flooding and those watering events are likely to differ. LiDAR doesn't pick up all of the changes in the landscape like smaller, lower points or crab holes. And we do know that the landscape is dynamic and changes each time you have a flood. There could be dirt bikes and four-wheel drives in the landscape. There could be fallen trees causing blockages across some of those flood runners. And we do know that the landscape changes over time with droughts as well. So we can utilise that for our managed inundation area and the extent of where the water's to be going, the depth of the water to be going, so we can really understand what is happening in the landscape and describe that in our environment report. Thanks, Kate.
All right. Thanks, Tim. I appreciate the update there. So the last part of our presentation is just a look ahead, basically what's next. So I'll just, before I kick on, I'll just remind you that the Q&A function is available to you. So if you want to pop a question into that Q&A chat, that'll help us with any questions you might have at the end of the presentation. Otherwise, you can always contact the team outside of the webinar setting. So James David showed us this diagram a little earlier, and I've just pulled it back up here so that I can attach some timing to it so that you can have an appreciation of where we're going with things. So we are delightfully close to having that environment report all signed and sealed and ready to go. And we're looking to get into that public exhibition, public inquiry part of the process in 2026. And that's the exciting bit where you get to get your hands on all of these specialist assessments, look into the detail, not only their methodology, but what their findings are, their observations, recommendations, etc. So what's next for each of the sites? So our central sites, Naya, Vinifera, Hatta and Belsa, they've been through planning scheme amendment, they've been through their environmental assessments, etc. And really the central sites are gearing up for construction readiness. To the west, Lindsay and Walpole Islands are in the same boat as our east sites, where we've been working towards the environment effects statement and planning scheme amendment work out there. And specifically for the east sites, we're all about being ready for public exhibition in 2026. In terms of public exhibition, I want to remind you that you don't need to wait until the environment report goes on public exhibition. If there's something in particular you want to discuss or understand about the work of the project team or what it's trying to achieve or how it's going about the assessment, so feel free to reach out at any point, regardless of whether the documents are on public exhibition. But if you'd like a sense of how much detail to expect or the breadth of the reporting, I'd recommend that you pop into the VMFRP portal, which is an online website essentially, and it's got all of the specialist assessments listed there for the two central packages that have already been on public exhibition. So the environment effects statement and the environment report for the central sites are all up there. And that might give you a bit of a sense of the size and scale of the document and the availability of information that you can expect for East sites as we get closer. And you'll also, if you're interested in the draft planning scheme amendment work, again, looking at those central sites will help you understand the course that we're on here for East. I also want to give a quick plug to our Field in Focus session that we'll host in the West. So if you think that that's going to be of interest to you, again, it'll be advertised by that same channel. There'll be an email sent out to our interested parties. It'll be on social media, and there'll be an invitation to register for those West focused sessions. And if you're not already subscribed, I recommend that you sign up for our quarterly newsletter. It's not a spamming activity. It's a collation of information that we think audiences that are interested in VMFRP will be keen to keep their finger on the pulse with. So either specific things or project partner updates or movements in the environment or the policy landscape that affect VMFRP as a project. So those go out quarterly, and we call it the floodplain babbler. And then the last one I wanted to show you was the just a quick look at the portal. So if you enter vmfrp.com.au, you'll be presented with that dual slide tile in the middle of your computer screen. And you can either click into the left, which is the project website, which is the traditional repository for our project information, or if you click into the project portal on the I've got this inverted so project website on your left as you look at your computer, or on your right, it's a environment assessment portal, and that's where we have some interactive maps. You can zoom right into sites and see where we're proposing to put regulators, infrastructure, the inundation extents that we're working towards. You can look at some videos with animated sequences, either at a project specific level, or you can look at whole of project overview. And then you can go into the site specific documentation. So there's some, there are the full environment report, the full EES for Central, they're there, but there's also some supporting interpretive information on that project portal as well. So if you need help to navigate that, again, reach out to the team and we'll be able to point you in the right direction or send you some hyperlinks or talk you through it and help connect you with the information that you're after. So that brings us to Q&A time. If anyone's got a question, I invite you to put it in the chat that we've got available to you. While I wait to see if anyone drops any questions in our Q&A, I'll just open the floor to James, David, and just double check, was there anything else you wanted to add that you think you didn't get to through that presentation?
No, there wasn't. I think I just reiterate your message. Feel free to reach out to the team with any questions that you do have. Obviously, great opportunity now, but the email lives there. So reach out.
We're all nerds and we're looking for people to talk to about this stuff so that our spouses don't have to hear about it at the end of the day. Tim, was there anything you needed to add or wanted to add while we had a captive audience?
No, I don't think so. Thanks, Kate. I know that Audrey and Ted are online, 2 SAG members. We will be re-engaging with them. We look to have the specialists coming to present up in the forests on the 26th and 27th of November, which would be really good, particularly the ecology specialist. So I'll be in contact with them to further organise those.
Oh, perfect. That'll be exciting. All right. Well, then we might leave it there. What I'll do is I'll wrap up. I'll send a quick email to our registered attendees, and in fact, anyone who did register, whether they made it to the session or not, and just give some direction on where to find the recorded webinar online in case they want to either recap, watch it for the first time, or refer it to a friend. But also that standing invitation to be in touch with the project team. So thank you for coming in your evening. We appreciate the time out of your day to listen to us about our passion projects. And we look forward to the next opportunity we have to talk to you.